It's time for another 2022 Nebraska football opponent preview. This time we're talking about Rutgers, the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. This is John Johnston, Coronation. You know, Rutgers is the butt of everybody's jokes. They have been for a while. You know, it's Rutger with a small R, or it's Butgers or things like that. And you kind of look at it and you go, do they really deserve this? Well, they kind of actually do. The first ever football game in 1869 was played at Rutgers between Rutgers and Princeton. It was a game that was more like rugby than anything that we would recognize as football nowadays. Rutgers won 6-4, and then everything went to shit. It really did. They gave themselves, if you go to like Wikipedia, you'll see that Rutgers or somebody gave them a national championship for 1869. So they have that going for them. In all their years of football, they have won one conference championship. In 2012, Kyle Flood was their coach. They won the Big East Conference Championship. And they were co-champs with Cincinnati, Louisville, and Syracuse. So 4 teams won the championship. Rutgers has been to a total of 11 bowl games in their history. And the last year they got into a bowl game, 2021 Gator Bowl. They replaced Texas A&M because of COVID and injuries and portal transfers and all sorts of weird stuff. But Texas A&M backed out of the game. Rutgers had 8 days notice and went to the Gator Bowl and lost to Wake Forest 38-10. That was with Greg Shiano as their new coach in 2019. But they went to a bowl game, you know what I mean? So they've been to a bowl game while Nebraska hasn't, so I'm not sure if we could spend too much time making fun of them. They are 94th in all time in history of their record of all teams. So they have a .493 winning record. Winning percentage, 662 wins, 682 losses, 42 ties. So 94th, I think they might be ahead of Indiana, though, our previous opponent. So I mentioned Greg Shiano. He coached there from 2001 to 2011, and he actually had success. I mentioned they'd been to 11 total bowl games. Well, he's responsible for 7 of those bowl games. So 2001 to 2011, then Greg went off to the NFL, and I don't think he did very well, and he moved around. He coached at Ohio State, and then he came back to Rutgers in 2019 because they kind of went, well, at least that guy could win some games. So now he's back, and instead of being in the Big East, he's in the Big Ten and probably finding it much tougher going than he did previously. So 2022, what are we looking at for Rutgers? We're looking at 12 starters total returning. And they play Nebraska on October 7th at 6 p.m. Central. That is a Friday night game. I don't know what happens in New Jersey on Friday nights, but I can't imagine it's probably not a good thing. And maybe it'll be a tough game for Nebraska. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Quarterback, Noah Vedral. Our buddy Noah Vedral comes back for another season. Last year, he completed 59% of his passes, 1,823 yards, 7 TDs, and 7 interceptions. He is their leading returning rusher with 297 yards and 2 touchdowns. Will he be starting this season? Most likely not. He'll probably give way to Gavin Wimsatt. Kind of a funky name. Sophomore, saw a lot of extensive playing time in the Gator Bowl last year, but you have 2 quarterbacks that they're working out. Noah Vedral's been around for a while, and he's serviceable. Running backs, Isaiah Pacheco went to the NFL for Rutgers. If you remember him, he seemed to be around forever. He went to the Kansas City Chiefs, and they have 2 guys to replace him, Avery Young and Kyle Mononge. 2 guys that pretty much are not very experienced. They're not the Pacheco guy. And we're going to find out how well they do. Wide receiver, they also lost a wide receiver to the NFL. Bo Melton went to the Seattle Seahawks. So they did have some skill guys that were decent last year. They come in, for receivers this season, they have Shamin Jones, who has played 26 games, 35 receptions, 334 yards. Aaron Cruikshank is back. If you remember him, he was one of the best returners in the nation, an exciting guy in 2020. But in 2021, he had a season-ending injury after only 5 games. So he was starting out last year as having an amazing season, 20 catches for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns. But then it all went awry. But he is back, and he is fast. He's probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest, one of the fastest players in the Big Ten. So, they got that going for him. Taj Harris transfers from Syracuse, where he played 32 games and has over 2,000 career receiving yards. Sean Ryan transferred in from West Virginia. Last season had 25 receptions for 399 yards and 3 TDs. You got the one guy that's the speed burner. You got other guys that are coming into the program trying to mix around. Is that an upgrade from last season? It probably depends more on how well the quarterbacks shake out. And here's the other thing. The offensive line. They had 2 starters returning, but now they don't. They have only 1 starter returning, as Reggie Sutton probably won't return from a knee injury he had in last fall. So he's not going to be ready to go. They have transfers. They have a lot of transfers, actually. Curtis Dunlap, who had 16 starts at Minnesota. Mike Ciafani, Colorado State transfer, who started there 5 times last season. Willie Tyler, transferring from Louisiana Monroe, 9 starts last season. And J.D. DiRenzo from Sacred Heart, who was an FCS All-American last year. So, those, I don't know, they sound kind of funky. They sound good. They sound like they have some experience, and they're not just going to start from scratch at Rutgers, but they are going to start from scratch getting together. Moving to the defense, Rutgers has, they have 1 starter returning in the front 7. They had 2, but Mohamed Torre, one of the defensive linemen, is out for the season after an injury in the spring. They have 1 defensive lineman returning, Mayan Ahanatu. They have some other guys that have some experience. Sophomores, defensive end Chianti Hamilton, who had 22 tackles last season. Sophomore Aaron Lewis, 30 tackles and 2.5 sacks. You move to the linebackers, their top 4 tacklers are gone from last season. They had hoped to get Drew Singleton back, but he actually, honestly, just last week was denied an appeal for a waiver to play in 2022. So they lost their 4 top tacklers from their defense. They have Tyreen Powell and Deion Jennings returning. And then we move to the secondary, defensive secondary. And this is the strength of their defense. Avery Young returns. He's a 5-year starter. He's a leading returning tackler with 81. Christian Eisen, 3-year starter. Robert Longerbeam. That's a name, isn't it? Robert Longerbeam. Max Melton led the team last year with 3 interceptions. And junior quarterback Kassan Abraham coming back. In other words, they have some experience in their defensive secondary, which I guess if you're going to have it, it's probably best to have it there maybe than anywhere else. Not in the Big Ten. So when we look at Rutgers, what are we looking at? Well, we are looking at a team who backed their way into a bowl game last year, so they got the extra practice time. We're looking at a team that has to replace a lot of people that they haven't been good in the past. That has nothing to do with now. But the real key here is all those offensive linemen that are new and trying to build an offensive line off of like 1 returning starter and trying to build a defensive front 7 off of 1 returning starter. Where you need to be the strongest in the Big Ten is probably up front, and Rutgers is not strong in those areas. So you would expect Rutgers to have kind of a cruddy season, except for one thing, and I think that's Greg Shiano. I think that Greg Shiano probably will teach them how to play tough football. I have no idea what anybody would go to Rutgers to coach. You remember Chris Ash being there? The guy looked like he was dying on the sideline every single game he coached there. I felt sorry for him after a while. I mean, if a man can weep, his face could weep without actually crying. That was Chris Ash at Rutgers for, 2-3 years? Gad. But Greg Shiano, I guess he went back there. Maybe he has some hope. To build them into a tough team. By the time Nebraska gets there on a Friday night in New Jersey, Nebraska should have, both teams will have some games under their belt, and we'll know a lot more about them. I know I said I wasn't going to do predictions on this stuff, but I would expect this to be a win for Nebraska. But what I'm trying to do is get through all of these, go through the strengths and weaknesses, and then I'll look at them and say, which one of these games do we think we're going to win? From a really kind of looking at the entire team perspective. But Rutgers, they'll be hard-pressed, I think, to make a bowl game in 2022. If they do, it'll be something around a 6-6 record. A lot of that, like everybody else, it depends on how they bring transfers into the program, how well they come together, how well they can be coached up, how well they can get their defense, front seven, and their offensive line straightened out. So that is Rutgers, 2022 Rutgers versus Nebraska. Thanks for listening, and I hope you're having a good time. The season is almost upon us.